During this time, women started to yearn for more independence, so they strayed away from the traditional values of the stereotypical view of a housewife. They then became flappers. Flappers wore shorter, waistless dresses in contrast with the long ankle-length dresses with corsets. They also cut their hair into boyish bobs. In public, they smoked cigarettes and drank alcohol. They were also so open about the topic of sex that they even talked about it in public. Styles of dancing like foxtrot, camel walk, tango, charleston, and shimmy became very popular. There were even events like marathon dancing where people tried to keep dancing for as long as they could. New famous African-American jazz musicians like Duke Ellington, Bessie Smith, and Louis Armstrong helped spread the popularity of jazz. Jazz was a new style that blended instrumental ragtime and vocal blues. The Harlem Renaissance also arose during the 1920s. The Harlem Renaissance was a literary and artistic movement that celebrated the African-American culture. Harlem became the world's largest black community. This close community helped spread and keep the African cultures alive. Through their writing, African Americans both celebrated their heritage and expressed the hardships of being black. Examples of these writers were Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, and Zora Neale Hurston. After the First World War, many writers that went to war saw the truths of what had happened and became very disillusioned. They no longer had pride in their involvement after seeing the horrors of the war. They developed the realist movement in order to accurately capture reality. Many American writers left America for Europe because they became very displeased with the American culture. Writers like these were F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and Sinclair Lewis. They ridiculed Americans for their conformity and materialism. You are all a lost generation. This quote was said by Gertrude Stein, who was an author like those mentioned before. She came up with the phrase, the lost generation, to describe her fellow realist writers. An example of realist writing that expressed these authors' disillusionment was The Great Gatsby. It was written by F. Scott Fitzgerald and addressed the materialism and conformity of Americans during the 1920s. Movies in the early half of the 1920s consisted of mostly silent movies, but in 1927 the first talkie was released, called The Jazz Singer. Movies were the most popular form of amusement for Americans. The industry was so successful that many actors and actresses had higher salaries than the president. Movies began to have more vulgar plots in the 1920s. They had a lot of sexual references throughout the movie that were not present in movies before the 1920s. The culture of immigrants were lost as many children of immigrants would watch American movies and adapt to American culture rather than their ethnic heritages. Improvements of the radio in the 1920s made long-distance broadcasting possible. Radios helped the growth of consumerism as many companies advertised their products and services on the radio. Radios also brought families together with their soap operas and book readings. Also, listeners tuned into sports broadcasts, politicians' speeches, and jazz music.